She was just trying to get home. Midnight. A cold walk down a familiar alley. No music in her ears. No smile on her face. Just a waitress finishing a shift and trying to make it back to her apartment like she had 100 times before. Then, a hand grabbed her wrist. A voice said, "Walk faster." And just like that, the world split in two. She thought he was going to hurt her. She didn't know he was watching someone else. She didn't know he was following a predator. She didn't know he was a billionaire hidden behind a hoodie, haunted by a loss no one could see. What she did know was this: her life was about to change, not because she screamed, but because someone stepped in quietly when it mattered most. And what followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning, a love story, and the kind of redemption you don't find in fairy tales, because sometimes the man who scares you at first is the one who refuses to let you walk alone again. It was midnight, the kind of cold where even silence feels sharp, and all around her the city seemed to sleep except for her footsteps, too loud in the absence of everything else. She was just trying to get home, nothing complicated, just 7 minutes and a shortcut through a familiar alley. That's how it always starts, doesn't it? Not with a scream, but with a decision so mundane it hides the risk. A young woman walking home alone, head down, coat tight, earbuds out just in case. But this night wasn't like the others. And when he grabbed her arm, told her to walk faster, she thought she was about to become another headline. But the twist? He wasn't the threat. He was the one who had been watching the real threat. What do you do when safety looks exactly like danger? When the person who grabs you might be the one saving your life? This is the true story of Kayla Reese, a waitress finishing a late shift, and a stranger in the dark who wasn't just a mystery. He was a billionaire in hiding, haunted by guilt, hunting shadows, and protecting her from someone closer than she realized. Kayla didn't start her night looking for trouble. She stepped out of the faded glass door of Monroe's diner, her breath ghosting in the night air, the soft hiss of the closing latch behind her, swallowed by the silence of a sleeping block. The streets looked empty, felt colder than usual, like they weren't just holding back weather, but warning. Her watch ticked over to 12 a.m. Same routine, same shortcut. Down an alley between a shuttered bookstore and an old pharmacy, then 2 blocks and she'd be home. 100 times she'd done this. But this time, something shifted. The kind of shift you don't hear, you feel. The sound of footsteps that weren't hers, that mirrored hers just a beat too closely, as if her own shadow had grown impatient. She slowed. So did they. She sped up. They matched. That's when she reached for her phone but didn't make it. A hand clamped around her wrist. A voice, not a yell, not a whisper, said, "Walk faster. Don't look back." Here's where everything most of us know about fear kicks in. Your body locks. Your logic stutters. Kayla didn't know whether to scream or run, and somehow did neither. The man's face was obscured by a hood. His tone was low, urgent, not cruel, but not comforting either. And yet he wasn't hurting her, just holding, just walking, pulling her deeper into the alley where the air felt thicker and the light didn't reach. This is where we must pause, not just in the story, but in our understanding of how we interpret threat. Sometimes the most terrifying moment isn't when someone attacks, it's when they don't. When they could, but don't. And the silence fills in the blanks. Kayla's mind spiraled. Why wasn't he robbing her? Why wasn't he dragging her off the main path? Was this the calm before violence? Or the edge of something else entirely? Then came a sound metal on concrete, a bottle rolling. She flinched, and something moved behind them. Another figure. Just a blur, then gone. That's when the man holding her whispered through clenched teeth, "Keep walking." His hand tensed not. To pull her, but to shield her, that detail matters. He stepped slightly in front of her, as if preparing to intercept whatever was chasing from behind. And in that moment, Kayla's fear shifted, not entirely, but enough to notice, enough to wonder. Had he grabbed her to protect her? Could that be true? When they finally reached a lit sidewalk again, his grip loosened, not fully, just enough. She stumbled forward, heart racing. But instead of fleeing, she turned to him. "What just happened?" she asked. No answer. Was someone following me? Still nothing. Until finally, in a voice that was too steady for the chaos behind them, he said, "He's been watching you for days." That's when the script flipped completely. This wasn't random. Someone had been tracking her. And he, this stranger, had been tracking him. She demanded answers, but the man, tall, composed, unreadable, only replied, "You should stop using that alley." Then, with the finality of a closing book, he turned and vanished into the dark. Now imagine being Kayla in that moment. Your heart still hammering, your legs trembling, and your thoughts divided between fear and relief. You don't know who he was. You don't know what almost happened. But you do know you weren't imagining it, because he knew too much. About your route, about your stalker, and about the moment danger nearly caught you. Kayla didn't sleep that night. She didn't shower. She didn't even make tea, which was usually her post-shift ritual. She just sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, coat barely off, replaying every second of that walk, that hand on her wrist, the blur in the alley, and the voice low, almost gentle, that told her to keep walking. The man hadn't heard her, but that didn't mean she felt safe. Not yet. She walked to the police station the next morning, still hollow-eyed, and unsure what to even report. A man grabbed me, but maybe saved me? Try explaining that to an officer with a keyboard and a clipboard. She did her best, described the alley, the stranger, the second figure, but there were no cameras, no other witnesses, no name. "We'll file it," the officer said flatly. "But without more, there's not much we can do." A shrug. A printed sheet. A feeling of helplessness disguised as due process. Back at the diner, her co-worker Lexi gave her a sideways look. "You okay? You look like someone pulled a ghost out of your stomach." Kayla hesitated. "I think someone followed me home." Lexi raised a brow. "Think? Or you're just spooked from too many double shifts." "No," Kayla said quietly. "He was there. Then someone else showed up. And the first one, he might have saved me." Lexi's teasing expression dropped. "Wait, saved you how?" "I don't know. He didn't tell me who he was. He just grabbed me and said someone was watching. Then he left." Lexi's voice dropped a notch. "You sure he's not the one you should be scared of?" And this is where the mental war begins. Because trauma doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it leaves you questioning yourself more than the world. Kayla started second-guessing everything. The sound of footsteps that stopped when she turned around. The reflection in the dark pharmacy window. The car that idled just a little. Too long near her building. Was she paranoid? Or was someone still watching? She changed her route, took longer ways home. Started walking only on well-lit streets. She left work earlier, avoided the alley completely. She double-checked the locks. Started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. But the thing that bothered her most wasn't the fear, it was the doubt. The constant ache of not knowing if it had all been real, or if she was now living in the shadow of a ghost only she could see. Then, one night, as she exited the 24-hour pharmacy with a bag of groceries and a bottle of cheap wine, she saw him. Standing under a rusted bus shelter across the street. Same hood, same stillness, same unreadable energy. He didn't move. He didn't wave. Just stood there, arms folded like a statue waiting to exhale, and this time Kayla didn't run. Her fear didn't vanish, but it didn't paralyze her either. She crossed the street and walked straight toward him. "You," she said firmly. "Why do you keep showing up?" No response. "You followed me. You grabbed me. You said someone was watching. Then you disappeared. Who are you?" He stared straight ahead, then finally answered, voice low. "It's not important." "Not important?" Kayla snapped. "What? Are you some self-appointed guardian angel? A vigilante? Or are you hiding something?" Her words came fast, sharp. "Maybe you're not a hero. Maybe you're the one I should be afraid of. Always there, always watching. What are you really trying to do?" He didn't flinch. Just sat down on the metal bench behind him, like her words had knocked the weight out of his knees. Shoulders slumped, voice barely audible. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a terrible brother." And just like that, the air changed. Kayla stopped. Her anger drained, replaced with something heavier, something quieter. She stood there, unsure what to say, then slowly sat beside him, not close, not touching, but there, present. The city hummed around them, distant and uncaring. But in that pocket of silence, two strangers sat shoulder to shoulder, each carrying stories they hadn't asked for. Let's unpack that moment. Because we live in a world that loves sharp edges and quick answers, but real trauma is messy. It doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes in the form of a man whose silence holds more pain than any outburst. Sometimes it sits next to you in the dark and doesn't explain itself. It just exists, and as we'd soon learn, the man Kayla had just met wasn't just mourning a sister, he was remaking himself around the wound. Her name was Sophia. She was 16. She walked home one night and didn't make it, and no one helped. No one called. Her screams echoed into windows that stayed shut. Her brother, this man who now went by Leo, was supposed to pick her up that night, but he didn't. He was at a networking event. "I didn't check my phone until it was too late," he whispered. And by then, she was gone. That confession wasn't just an explanation. It was a map of how guilt can harden into purpose. Of how one man turned grief into vigilance. Not justice, not revenge, just presence. He didn't walk the streets to play hero. He did it because he couldn't sleep knowing there were still girls walking alleys alone. In the weeks that followed, they didn't plan to meet, but they did. not by accident, by silent agreement. There were no calls, no texts, no promises. Just glances exchanged across dim-lit sidewalks, unspoken cues that became a kind of rhythm. They'd walk together, sometimes from the diner to the corner, sometimes for blocks, sometimes nowhere in particular, but always side by side, always quiet. The space between them didn't ask for words, it just allowed them to exist. For Kayla, it was surreal. The man who once felt like a threat, who had emerged from shadows with a hand around her wrist, had become a presence she didn't dread. A protector, maybe, but not in the traditional sense. Leo didn't try to save her. He just stood with her, walked with her, made the silence feel less dangerous. Let's talk about how powerful that is. Because when you've been shaken by fear, when the world feels unstable, what you crave isn't grand gestures or declarations, it's consistency. Someone who just keeps showing up. Leo was that. Still guarded, still grieving, but steady. He never asked for anything. He never demanded her trust. He just kept walking with her, one step at a time, without requiring her to explain why that mattered. And as their walks grew longer, so did the glimpses into his world. He brought her to a soup kitchen where he volunteered once a week, no fanfare, no speeches, just him quietly serving plates. Kayla began bringing extra food from the diner, leftover pies, wrapped sandwiches, and handing them out beside him. She watched how he spoke to people with eye contact and dignity, how he remembered names, how his silence had a weight that made people feel seen without needing to speak. Still, neither of them brought up that night in the alley. They didn't talk about fear or guilt or trauma, not directly. Instead, their silence softened, became easier to carry. Kayla found herself opening up more, not with confessions, but with presence. She didn't shrink around him anymore. She didn't wonder if she was crazy, and Leo, he changed too. He began looking her in the eye more often. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it wasn't polite, it was honest. Then came the night. That changed everything again. They were sitting on the steps of a closed public library, watching the city's glow fade into night when Leo finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a shift, like the lock on a door finally clicking open. Her name was Sophia, he said. She was 16. She loved lemon candy and old books. She wanted to be a writer. I still have the first chapter of a novel she started. Kayla listened, not daring to interrupt. She was coming home from a birthday party, only a few blocks. But it was dark. Someone followed her, hurt her, and nobody helped. People heard her. They shut their windows. Kayla's heart ached, because now the pieces fit. Leo hadn't become her shadow by chance. He had made it his mission to be there for the ones who walked alone, because no one had been there for his sister. I was supposed to pick her up, he said. But I didn't. I was at some networking thing, and I didn't check my phone. When I did, it was too late. There are some stories that sit in your chest like a stone. This was one of them. Not because of the tragedy alone, but because of how he'd carried it. Silently, without self-pity, without expecting redemption. He walked because he couldn't forget. And in doing so, he had changed the outcome of someone else's story, Kayla's. That night, as rain began to fall, They took cover under a bookstore awning. They were both soaked, but neither cared. Kayla, holding a crumpled tissue, gently dabbed water from his forehead. And for the first time, Leo didn't flinch. He just looked at her, really looked. No walls, no armor, just presence. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. "You're not responsible for every bad thing that happens in the world. You don't have to carry it all." He didn't answer, so she reached out and took his wrist, not forcefully, but gently. Echoing the night he'd done the same to her. "You don't have to protect the world," she said again. "Just let someone protect you for once." That's the paradox, isn't it? People who spend their lives trying to save others often forget how to be saved. They armor up with purpose, but underneath, there's grief that's never been named. Kayla didn't have to fix him. She just had to see him, and that's what she did. In that moment, she didn't offer comfort. She offered companionship. And it was exactly what he needed. For a brief stretch of time, life softened, not magically. Not without shadows, but enough. Kayla still felt eyes in dark places, still checked over her shoulder, still tightened her grip on her bag at night. But walking beside Leo, whether down familiar blocks or new ones, was like moving through the same world with a second heartbeat, one that kept her steady. And Leo, for all his scars and silence, was beginning to change too. He didn't admit it. He didn't need to. But Kayla saw it in how he stood taller when she was near, how he lingered a second longer at corners, how his gaze became less like a searchlight and more like a compass, focused. Not frantic dot, but safety, as we know, is rarely permanent. And the feeling Kayla thought she'd left behind, the dread of being watched, returned. Not in full-blown panic, just subtle signs. The footsteps behind her that stopped the second she turned around. The flicker of a figure reflected in a dark window. A car parked just across from her building. Engine on, lights off, for too long to be a coincidence. She tried to tell herself it was just her nerves. But Leo confirmed what she feared. They sat together on a bench near the park, dusk bleeding across the sky in golds and deepening blues. "He's still out there," Leo said. "Same man, same pattern. I've seen him near the diner twice this week." Kayla's stomach dropped. "So what do? We draw him out," he said, carefully. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Kayla would walk her old route home, the exact path she used to take, same time, same alley. Leo would follow at a distance, not watching her, but watching the dark. And nearby, officers people Leo had contacted would wait for a signal. It felt like something out of a movie. Except it wasn't. It was real. The fear was real. The stakes were real. That night, Kayla stepped out of Monroe's diner with her heart beating so loud she thought it might drown out her footsteps. Every sound, every breeze, every rustle of litter down the gutter felt amplified. Her hands trembled, but she walked. The alley loomed ahead like a wound in the street, damp, dim, narrow. She hesitated for half a breath, then stepped in, and then footsteps. Not hers, fast, purposeful, gaining. She turned and saw a figure burst from the shadows behind her. A man, fast, intent clear in his motion. But before he could reach her, another figure intercepted like a lightning strike. From the dark, Leo, no words, just movement. He tackled the man with a force that cracked against the alley walls. A scuffle broke out, grunts, fists, grit scraping underfoot. The attacker pulled a knife. It flashed once under the weak alley light. Kayla screamed. Leo dodged, but not fast enough. The blade found his side. Kayla didn't think. She just moved, ran forward, grabbed the attacker's arm, tried to pull him back. He shoved her hard, but she didn't fall. She held on, with everything she had. Then sirens. Blue and red burst at the edge of the alley. Officers flooded in. The attacker tried to bolt, but didn't make it far. He was tackled, handcuffed, pinned to the ground before he reached the sidewalk. And Kayla? She dropped to her knees beside Leo. His shirt was soaked, his breath ragged. "I've got you," she whispered, pressing her hands to his side. "Stay with me. Just stay with me. Let's slow this moment down." Because what just happened wasn't a rescue. It was a culmination of fear that had been simmering for weeks. Of one man's promise to never let someone walk alone again. Of one woman who refused to be preyed upon. This wasn't fiction. It wasn't clean. It was messy, desperate, real. In the ambulance, the police told Kayla everything. The man who attacked her was a serial predator wanted in another state for multiple assaults. He'd slipped through the system, vanished into cities, always watching, always stalking, always waiting for someone walking alone. He admitted he planned to rob you, one officer said grimly. And worse. That thought hit Kayla like ice. The night could have ended very differently. If Leo hadn't been there. If she hadn't grabbed his arm. If the police had been a minute later. The what-ifs were suffocating, but Leo had been there. And now, as he drifted in and out of consciousness beside her, she held his hand like a lifeline. The hospital ride was a blur. She yelled at the cab driver to go faster, held Leo as his breathing grew shallow. And when they reached the E, she refused to let go until nurses physically pulled her away. "We need his full name," the nurse said. "Any medical history?" Kayla blinked. "His name is Leo. That's all I know." "Last name?" I don't." She reached for her phone, fumbling through notes, anything. Then a doctor walked by reading a chart. "Liam Carter," he said aloud. Kayla froze. Liam Carter. That name wasn't just familiar, it was everywhere. Reclusive tech billionaire. Founder of Carter Innovations. Philanthropist. Ghost to the media. A man who built an empire without ever stepping into a spotlight. He had been walking her home at midnight. Handing out sandwiches, standing in the rain, taking a knife to the ribs to protect her from a predator, and he hadn't said a word. Liam Carter. The name hung in the air like static. Kayla heard it, but it didn't register, not fully. Because how could it? How could the man who held her hand in the rain, who walked silently beside her for weeks, who never spoke of himself, be that Liam Carter? The one whose face rarely made headlines, but whose company shaped the digital tools she used every day. Who built a billion-dollar tech empire, gave millions to charity, but remained so reclusive that people joked he didn't exist? Her Liam, if she could even call him that, wasn't a man of boardrooms or luxury. He was a man who bled in her arms, who handed out food, who stood in doorways like a shadow with a purpose. In the waiting room, her hands still stained with blood, Kayla replayed everything. The way he never talked about himself, the way he listened, the way he moved like he wasn't trying to be seen but couldn't stop showing up. She sat for hours, refusing to leave. Doctors came and went. Nurses gave updates. But she didn't breathe fully until they let her into his room. Liam lay pale under the sterile hospital lights, machines gently beeping, tubes trailing from his arms. The monitors said he was stable, but Kayla didn't believe it until he moved, until his hand twitched, until his fingers, cool and trembling, curled around hers. "May," he whispered. His voice cracked. "May." That was what he always called her, May. A simple nickname, a sliver of spring in the middle of fear. She smiled through tears. "You're okay," she said. "You're okay." He blinked at her, dazed. You stayed." "Of course." "I did," she whispered. "You never left me." "I'm not leaving you. Let's pause here and consider what this moment really is. It's not just reunion, it's revelation." The man behind the mystery wasn't just someone who hid from the world. He was someone who chose to be present where it mattered, even if it meant giving up his anonymity. That kind of power, the power to walk away from privilege to protect someone else, isn't loud. It's quiet, sacrificial, rare. Kayla didn't leave his side for 2 days. She fed him spoonfuls of broth, adjusted his blankets, talked to him in soft whispers about everything and nothing. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. "I thought I lost you," she said one night. He looked at her, eyes clear now. "You didn't. You never will." And then he kissed her. No drama, no build-up. Just lips that had stayed silent too long, pressing gently against hers like a promise. A kiss that said, "I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere." 3 months passed. Liam recovered. And Kayla? She didn't return to Monroe's diner. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd been offered something else. A new position at Carter Innovations, not as a favor, not as a token. As someone Liam trusted. She became his personal assistant, his shadow in the office, just as he had once been hers on the street. She moved through the high-rise with the same quiet confidence she had behind the counter, remembering names, listening more than she spoke, bringing calm to rooms that often buzzed with noise and urgency. People noticed, but not because she flaunted her relationship. There were no desk kisses, no flaunting, just mutual respect. And Liam? He changed too, slowly, meaningfully. He started sitting longer in meetings, asking junior staff for their ideas, smiling in the hallway. He no longer vanished behind frosted glass and encrypted logins. He became human, approachable, present, and everyone knew why. Because of her. Because of the waitress who didn't know who he was, but walked with him anyway. Their relationship didn't need to be announced. It lived in the way his face softened when she entered a room, in the way he leaned in when she spoke, in the way he deferred to her judgment, not as a gesture of romance, but as a reflection of respect. Then one afternoon, the light poured golden through the conference room windows. Most of the staff had gone home. Kayla was gathering her things when Liam walked in, hands in his pockets, eyes uncertain, an unfamiliar look for a man who once built his world on confidence. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" she asked, setting her notebook down. He walked to the center of the room, paused, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a small velvet box. "I found you in the dark," he said, voice steady but thick. "But you brought light to my world." He dropped to one knee, opened the box. A simple, elegant ring inside. "Will you be my light forever?" Kayla's breath caught. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Yes," she whispered. Then again louder, "Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, stood, and wrapped his arms around her as the last light of day wrapped around them both. The wedding was nothing like what the tabloids would have imagined for Liam Carter. There were no gold invitations, no drones buzzing overhead, no fashion magazine spreads waiting to judge the guest list. It was not a spectacle, it was a sanctuary. A garden behind an ivy-covered estate just outside the city, bathed in late summer light, with the kind of quiet that made even time feel like it had paused to witness something sacred. There were white roses lining the stone path, twinkling fairy lights in the hedges, and an air so still and reverent it felt like a secret kept by the universe. Kayla wore a dress that shimmered in soft silver, not extravagant, not trying to impress, just true to her. Her golden hair framed her face in effortless waves, her eyes shining not with awe but with peace. And Liam, in a crisp navy suit, stood beside her, not with the posture of a CEO but of a man who'd finally found home. In the front row sat Kayla's mother, eyes misty, hands clutching a handkerchief. Next to her were Carter Innovation staff, some in ties, others in rolled-up sleeves, every one of them smiling, not because of who Liam was, but because of who he had become. And then there were the guests who didn't wear suits at all, those with weathered coats and old shoes, the people whose names Liam had remembered, whose burdens he'd quietly eased, the ones who once stood at the edge of society and were now part of its most intimate celebration. No one asked how they got there. No one questioned their presence. Because those who understood the story knew this wedding wasn't about prestige. It was about redemption, love, humanity. As the officiant stepped back, Liam turned to Kayla, took both her hands in his, and leaned in just close enough for her alone to hear. "From now on," he whispered, "you'll never have to walk that." Allie alone again, her eyes filled, her grip tightened. "Because I'll always have you," she whispered back. And with that, they walked hand in hand through a rain of soft white petals, into laughter, into music, into the kind of joy that doesn't photograph well but stays in the soul forever. Let's reflect on how far this story has come from a lonely walk through a dangerous alley to a moment where two people stood in the sun, no longer carrying fear alone. It's easy to think of protection as something physical, a body, a hand, a weapon, a shield. But the most powerful kind of protection, it's emotional. It's love that listens. It's presence that doesn't flinch. And it's loyalty that doesn't demand gratitude. Liam had started as a silent shadow, trying to make penance for a sister lost. Kayla had started as just another woman trying to make it home safe. But together, they redefined what it meant to save and be saved. Their lives moved forward, not with fireworks, but with the kind of momentum that builds quietly over time. Kayla continued working at Carter Innovations, not as the boss's wife, but as someone whose insight shaped decisions. She was respected for her clarity, her calm, her refusal to let her title replace her voice. And Liam, well, he wasn't just different, he was present. He hosted team lunches, mentored interns, laughed at jokes. He didn't disappear into his work anymore, he lived in it. And it wasn't just because he was in love. It was because he was alive. Every so often, Kayla would catch herself still reaching for his hand when they crossed the street. And he'd always be there, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. The memory of that alley, that night, had faded, but its impact never left them, because they both knew how close things had come, how thin the line between loss and love can be. And if you're watching this thinking, this doesn't happen in real life, let me remind you, real life is stranger, messier, and more beautiful than fiction. People do change. Strangers do. Save lives. And sometimes, a man who built the world's most invisible empire chooses to become most visible when it matters most. Asterisk. The truest kind of protection doesn't come from power, it comes from presence. Liam didn't change the world by hiding behind his wealth. He changed it by showing up for someone else, quietly, consistently, without expecting anything in return. And Kayla didn't need a savior, she needed a partner. Someone who walked beside her, not in front. If this story reminded you that love can begin in fear, that guilt can turn into purpose, or that healing sometimes comes from the people we least expect, then carry that with you. Because you never know whose alley you might walk into, or whose life you might change just by standing still and not flinching.